Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, or your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it.
Today, we venture into the haunting tale of Gregory Agnew, a case that intertwines with the mysterious disappearance of his former girlfriend, Tammy Niver, and the complex dynamics of their relationship. Set against the backdrop of Ypsilanti, Michigan, this case raises questions about justice, loss, and human connection. To fully appreciate the significance of this story, we must first understand the city where it unfolds. Ypsilanti is located in Washita County. It's a vibrant college town deeply influenced by its rich history and cultural diversity. Established in 1823, Ypsilanti is home to Eastern Michigan University, giving the city a youthful energy. Known for its historic architecture and quaint downtown, it boasts charming streets lined with bookstore, cafes, and eateries that reflect a progressive community spirit. However, beneath this seemingly ideal exterior lies a dark history intertwined with personal and community tragedies. Ypsilanti's street holds stories of families, struggles, and for some, unresolved mysteries like that of Tammy Niver. Tammy Lorraine Niver was born on May 31st, 1969, in the midst of a loving family, but her life would take a tragic turn. At 24, she was a dedicated mother of two and had just recently ended a tumultuous relationship with Gregory Agnew. On August 7th, 1993, Tammy disappeared under suspicious circumstances that would forever haunt her family and community. That day, she had gone to visit Agnew to pick up some of her belongings from their shared apartment. Agnew was the last person to see her, and despite various search efforts, she was never found. Her family reported her missing when she failed to return home, sparking a search that would uncover unnerving details about her last known hours.
The relationship between Tammy and Gregory was fraught with tension, jealousy, and emotional turmoil. Friends and family described Agnew as possessive and controlling. There were alarming reports of his violent tendencies, which became apparent to those close to the couple. In a chilling recount, a witness recalled an incident where Agnew threatened Tammy, allegedly stating, "If you ever leave me, I'll kill you." This sentiment reflected the toxic dynamics that would lead to profound consequences. As their relationship unraveled, Tammy sought independence. She, decided that she was going to move out of Agnew's residence just a day before she went missing. Now, her decision to reclaim her life foreshadowed a conflict that would ultimately end in tragedy. So, on the morning of August 7th, 1993, Tammy left her home to visit Agnew. According to Agnew, they talked briefly before she departed his house. However, there was no sign of her afterward. He claims after she left, he no longer saw her. Her family's fears were realized when they discovered that her borrowed 1979 Mercury Marquis was found abandoned in Ypsilanti. The keys remained in the ignition and the car was parked illegally in the street. A chilling indication that something had gone wrong. Now, in the ensuing investigation, Agnew's behavior raised a lot of suspicions with the police. Witnesses saw him running across the street with wet pants when he was questioned by police earlier that morning. Now, he claimed that he was trying to rent a movie, but when police checked, they found that the store had closed hours earlier. Police began to piece together a narrative filled with uncertainty and inconsistencies. They were trying to figure out why his story just didn't seem to line up. As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement began to scrutinize Agnew's statements. The evidence pointed increasingly towards foul play. Agnew claimed that Tammy had left his residence after their talk, but no one could corroborate this story. Their apartment was surprising to investigators as well. Reports indicated a strong smell of bleach. Now, we've heard this before, Steph, right? Like, whenever police hear that there's some sort of smell of bleach or cleaning agents, what does that suggest to the officers?
Obviously, something was cleaned. You're trying to cover something.
Right, especially that strong smell of bleach, right? Because when whenever you clean with bleach, there's a strong smell. But when you clean excessively with bleach, it seems like you're trying to cover something up. So the police's alerts were flagging. And as they continued to search Anu's apartment, they found garbage bags and a shovel. This also raised alarms to the investigators because why would someone in an apartment complex need a shovel? His actions spoke volumes. Did Anu hide something a little more sinister, or was this just weird? Despite attempts to gather evidence against him, Anu managed to evade culpability in Tammy's disappearance because law enforcement actually left the apartment complex that day without the shovel or the bags that they saw at the house. Steph, what do you think about that?
I think that they just dropped the ball because they willingly told the public in this documentary we watched, which I'll link in the show notes, but they willingly said, we found that to be suspicious. They found that to be odd. They wrote it down in their notes, but nobody retrieved the items. So about the time that they remembered, when they got back to the station and fumbled through all their items, they were like, man, let's go back. And of course, he's going to be like, let me go ahead and get rid of this.
Steph, now didn't they also find her purse in the apartment?
They found her purse in the apartment, and she was a type 1 diabetic. That was one of the things that made her missing person case, go straight to the top, because she needed her insulin in order to survive. If she didn't have it, she was going to be in a medical emergency. But they did not find her insulin inside of her purse at Anu's apartment.
So although they found her purse and items that she would need if she were missing, for example, like her credit cards and her, wallet, her driver's license, they didn't find the insulin.
Right. And I mean, that really isn't a red flag necessarily, because he willingly admitted that she was at the apartment. They had sex, according to him. They had a conversation. She was supposed to be coming over there to, move out. So it really wasn't the big red flag that maybe you or I are thinking that it is.
Right. In hindsight, right? We're looking at this in hindsight. But this definitely left the family profoundly frustrated. What happened after that, Steph?
Shortly after this, Martha and her friends, let me say this, that Tammy was living in an apartment complex that she found shortly after moving out of the apartment that she shared with Anu, that was really a community of single mothers. There was a lot of young single mothers that had children, and they were really a community for one another. And they would celebrate birthdays with one another for their children. They were just a safe haven for one another. So in the days that Tammy was missing, really the people that were looking for her the most, in addition to Tammy's family, was a woman by the name of Martha. And she was actually Tammy's really good friend. She actually took temporary custody of Tammy's 2 young girls. Martha knew that Gregory had something to do with the disappearance of Tammy. I kind of want to dig a little deeper into the relationship between Anu and Tammy and tell you a little bit more about what the family and friends of Tammy knew about it. According to Martha and Tammy's sister, Tammy was coming home with bruises and bumps. She also would come back home with a bloody nose, and she would immediately get to explaining exactly what happened. She would say, oh, this is not anything that Greg did. MD, we've heard this story before when it comes to domestic abuse. Immediately, someone who is experiencing this, who isn't quite ready to leave, they'll immediately start to explain away the bumps and bruises and the outward display of domestic abuse that comes with the abuse, right?
Absolutely. It's really common for that to be a way to avoid accountability for the other person's actions, right? So they don't want to alarm somebody else. They don't really want them to tell them to leave. They're not in a position at that point where they're ready to leave. So that it's such a common trend that we see in cases like these.
Absolutely. And so she wasn't quite ready, nor was she ready to really explain what was going inside of her relationship with Greg. So when she came up missing, truly her friend Martha knew that Greg had something to do with it. And according to Tammy's sister, Tammy said in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, that can only be substantiated by her sister, that if something happened to her, you know, those words that we often hear, that if something happens to me, then Greg is responsible. Martha was heavily burdened by these haunting words by Tammy's sisters, and then just knowing that some abuse was taking place inside of the relationship. Martha took it upon herself to work with the police to try to catch Greg up, because they could not arrest him based on any evidence, because they didn't collect that shovel that we were talking about. They didn't collect those garbage bags, and they really didn't have anything other than suspicion. And we talk a lot here about how, you know, being suspicious isn't enough to arrest somebody, right, MD?
Right. And honestly, circumstantial evidence is good, but they didn't even have that.
Right.
They didn't even have a lot of circumstantial evidence. I mean, they had just exactly what you said. They had reasonable suspicion. Why are you running across the street with wet pants? Why do you have a shovel in your house? Oh, but we didn't collect the shovel. Oh, your house smells like bleach, but we didn't do anything else to really collect any DNA to see. You know, it just wasn't enough to be able to say that he was responsible for Tammy. And at this point, is Tammy alive? Like, we don't, you know, they can't definitively even say that she's not alive and well. It's just not enough. And it sucks because the family knew and the police knew that this man had something to do with it. They just didn't have the thing to tie him to it, the evidence to link him.
Talk about a series of unfortunate events. Martha comes along and she decides that she's going to cooperate with the police and wear a wire. Talk about boldness. I'm going to wear a wire and I'm going to build a relationship with Greg and I'm going to get him to give me a confession. And for a while, this works out. She doesn't get anything that is substantial. She doesn't gather any evidence that is good enough to lead to an arrest, but she does build a rapport with him and is talking to police on a weekly basis. For months up to a year, she is constantly talking to police and notifying them of her findings. Up to a year, it slows down. And the police are trying to figure out, okay, what's going on, Martha? What's happening? This is when they find out that she no longer wants to cooperate with them. She tells investigators that Martha and Greg are now an item. By item, they go together real bad. Yeah, they're in a relationship. What do you think about that, MD?
I think that when I first saw this, it blew my mind. Because how do you go from I'm going to take this man down by any means necessary because he killed my best friend to, in your words, I'm with him real bad. Like, how do we make that? That is a huge leap. That's not 2 steps forward, she jumped the ocean to get there. And it really, honestly, Steph, speaks to his level of charisma and ability to manipulate, so to speak, or just, you know, and I don't even know if manipulation is the word I want to use, just that enticement. You know, some men just have it, and not just men, women too. Like, they just have this thing that just draws you in and you find yourself completely enthralled.
I think charming is the word, and deceitful. Just they entrap you. Caught up in the rapture. I hate to throw that out there, but I'm gonna just throw it out there and hope you catch it.
Caught up in the rapture.
It's just ridiculous. And actually, Martha's sister was frightened for her when she decided to start to wear the wires. She got into plenty of fights with her sister. She was like, please don't do this. I think you might die because of this. I don't want you to get caught up with this situation. This man possibly murdered Tammy. And to find out that she ended up falling for him, it was insane. And at the time, Martha had 3 small girls that she ended up moving Greg in the house with her 3 small children. And they grew up with Greg as their father. He was their father figure. They really respected him as a stepfather, and they had a pretty good upbringing with Greg. But he was not invited to the cookout with them. Quite literally, that they did not allow him to come to family events because although years had passed, there was always this underlying suspicion about Greg in the community that he was responsible for Tammy's disappearance. He knew more than what he was leading on. Fast forward to February 2018, Gregory Agnew finds himself at the center of another tragic narrative, the murder of his estranged wife, Martha Agnew. You heard correctly, Martha married Gregory Agnew. And all of this kind of went down in a very peculiar way because although they began dating, I want to say a year and a half to 2 years after Tammy went missing, they didn't immediately get married. They only got married because another series of unfortunate events went down. Inside of the household, the youngest child started to see some friction inside of the household. She started to see that Greg was starting to get more upset with her mother, and her mother just was starting to be more afraid of Greg, and she didn't quite understand what was going on inside of the household. She actually found a folder that was hidden away in the garage, and it had Tammy Niver's name on it. And once she looked it up on the internet, as kids do, that's when she discovered that it was this woman who went missing, and Greg's name was mentioned in the article. She confronted her mother with this information, and her mother kind of brushed her off. She knew that something wasn't going right in the household and couldn't really put her finger on it. And instead of trying to talk to her mother about it again, she decided to go to the counselor at school. The counselor asked if she could reach out to her mother and maybe help her mother work through what may be going on inside of the household, whether it be domestic violence or just an outlet for her mother to talk. And she knew that her mother more than likely wasn't going to talk. And it just made her feel very uncomfortable. Really, nothing came out of that situation, but maybe a year to 2 years later, a friend of Martha came forward to police and told police a tip that Martha confessed to her that Greg did kill Tammy. Tammy fell into a table and died, and he disposed of her body. This person came forward, and police had enough information to at least bring Greg into the police station. When they arrested him, he screamed out as they were arresting him at Martha's house, "I knew this was going to be about Tammy." Martha, of course, quickly went down to the police station, and they felt like they had Martha left to center in terms of having her in a place where she was isolated by herself away from Greg so that she could admit to what was going on inside of the household and basically just get her to tell what she knew about the situation and to affirm what the friend had told her. But she did the direct opposite. She said she had no idea what this friend said. She said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Later on, they released Greg because once again, they didn't have enough what, MD?
They didn't have enough evidence. As they released Greg, they released Martha, and Martha and Greg decided to get married. Because if you are married, you cannot make the spouse give testimony against the other spouse, right? There is a privilege that prevents that. Greg made sure that he tied her up, got her wrapped up, and that any secrets that she may have known, she would not be able, even if she knew them, would not be able to confess them on the stand or in a trial or any of that. They got married. And the marriage, progressed and it went along. Like Steph said, the tension within their relationship continued to escalate. The kids continued to see the dynamic shift from that of just, super loving and one of care and nurture to that of, a tumultuous relationship. And eventually, a couple years later, Martha ends up moving out. Martha decides, I can't do this. This is not healthy for me. It's not healthy for my children. I need to do something different. And Martha ends up moving out. And Steph, didn't they argue or have a judge like have them split their apartment, on ways that they could access their apartment? It was really a strange situation.
It was a different type of divorce proceeding where they had a rental property that they were splitting, and they had like essentially hours in which they could be at this particular rental property. So he could be there at a particular time and she could be there at a particular time until their divorce proceeding was final and they could split everything in the proper way. It was very bizarre. But that's how it was because they were getting a divorce, and that's the way that the judge decided to handle it. Everything was going along. Really, Martha was to herself at that time, and she was handling her time between the rental property, between the hours in which she was supposed to, and also spending time with her older children and their children, her grandchildren. And that's when the unthinkable happened. Martha was discovered dead in their Ypsilanti home, having been killed through strangulation and suffering blunt force trauma to her head. The situation intensified debates over Gregory Agnew's violent past and unresolved questions from Tammy Niver's case. In September 2019, Gregory Agnew was convicted of first-degree murder for Martha Agnew's death. The trial showcased emotional testimonies from family members and included evidence that tied him to the earlier disappearance of Tammy Niver. During the trial, Agnew's complicated history with both women were laid bare, revealing a pattern of manipulation and threats that pointed towards a disturbing potential for violence. The jury deliberated and reached a verdict. Gregory Agnew received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Martha's murder, bringing closure to her family, but leaving Tammy Niver's case still open.
The disappearance of Tammy Niver continues to resonate in Ypsilanti and beyond. As of today, she remains a missing person, her case unsolved, a tragic reminder of the impact of domestic violence and the complexities that surround personal relationships. Despite being a suspect in Niver's disappearance, Gregory Agnew has never been formally charged in relation to her case. The local community and law enforcement continue to seek answers, hoping for resolution for both families affected by Agnew's action.
Takeaway.
Whenever we have domestic violence type situations, I think the takeaway is really more I want to place the call on friends and family of the domestic violence victim. Because, when you're in it, yes, you got to get out. But I feel like because I'm not a person that has, been a victim of domestic violence, it's hard to feel like I can tell a domestic violence abuse, victim what he should do, right? I think that the call of action should then be on the friends and families of these victims, because we see it, right? We see it, and whether we decide to turn a blind eye to it, to act like it's not there, to pretend like they're not red flags, we have to be more alert for the sake of our family, our loved ones, our friends, because it literally can end in death. That's the extreme of the situation. It can end in death, and it doesn't have to. And here with Tammy Niver, it likely ended in death. We don't have her body, but it likely ended in death. And unfortunately, Agnew got away with it, right? And then, her best friend calls herself trying to get involved, and she gets wrapped up by the charisma and the charm that is Gregory Agnew, and she too falls victim to the same domestic violence pattern that he inflicted on all of his victims. Because although we didn't dive deep into the trial, there was actually a girl that was before, one of his girlfriends before Tammy, before Martha, that came forward on the stand and said, yeah, he beat me almost to death. He almost electrocuted me when I decided I was going to leave. Because for people like Gregory Agnew, he just wanted control. If he couldn't have you, nobody could. Tammy probably decided to leave, or she did. She started to establish her life outside of him. He didn't like that, and he killed her. Martha left, established her life without him. He didn't like that, and he killed her. And so the call of action has to then be on us, the friends and loved ones of these victims, and to try to convince them, to make it loud, to get all up in their face, to get all up in their business and say, listen, I'm here. I will support you. Whatever you need. Let me be a resource. Let me get you resources. Let me pray with you, for you. Let's get out of this, because this can end in death.
What I think is important about this case is that we continue to highlight missing person cases. It is because of the Tammy Niver case that we can pinpoint, and that investigators were able to pinpoint who Greg Agnew was. It is sad that, unfortunately, Martha was not able to see Greg who he was until it was too late. But I think it is the responsibility of those who are in media, to whatever capacity, whether that be a podcast host, journalist, it doesn't matter. We have to continue to cover these cases and continue to bring awareness to missing person cases. And it is unfortunate that to this day, Greg Agnew has not copped to his involvement in Tammy Niver's case. But we know that he was indeed responsible for her death, or for her disappearance, for that matter. So that is our case for this week. We hope that you guys have enjoyed it. We appreciate your patience with us and this new technology and this new software and editing process. We know that it is a journey, but you guys have stuck with us, and for that, we are forever grateful. Let us know what you think about this week's episode. Have you heard of this particular case? I know that it was brand new for me. Let us know what you think. Until next time, friends, this is Murder in the Black. Thank you.